So I just woke up, and as you can see, I'm still in bed, but I was greeted this morning with a new video by Steven Crowder. Now, this is a guy that I've talked about before. I'm going to be talking about some more in the future. And Steven Crowder, he's a great entertainer, a great comedian, but of course, this is a guy that should not be looked up by any means as some sort of ideological leader or some sort of political leader. So he released a new video about that whole Indian guy with the MAGA Catholic school boys controversy. And the video has a lot of really great points. I encourage you to go watch it. But because it's Steven Crowder, he can't just make a great video. He has to also hurt us at the same time. He has to kind of hurt our cause at the same time. With Steven Crowder, he had to put out this video instead of just making it a perfect video, which he could have easily done, especially since this is an edited video. I understand when you're talking off the cuff, it's very hard for sometimes everything to come out perfectly. Sometimes you misspeak or you could have been a little bit more clear, but they could have edited this video. So with Steven Crowder, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Let's look at the video. I'm just going to play parts of it, but go watch the whole thing on your own. Let's see how it starts out here.
The kids in the MAGA hats come across as douchey. Granted, they come across as douchey, but we're all supposed to act like this guy isn't a toothless far-left activist instigator seemingly on an opium vision quest? I don't understand.
That's a very interesting way to start out the video, but let's go to where it actually appears. That's how he wanted to open it. He has to have this in the video more than once, apparently. It's so important. It's such a great opening, but let's see it.
We always took care of our elders. We took care of our children. We always provided for them. You know, we taught them right.
I mean, is it me? Because if the kids in the MAGA hats come across as douchey, granted, they come across as douchey, but we're...
It's funny, these kids do nothing wrong. These were kids at a pro-life march, a very noble cause. They care about life. And these are kids, some of them as young as 14 years old, roughly 14 to 17-year-olds. A lot of them were 15, 16. And Crowder, a middle-aged man, he feels the need to call these kids douchey. Granted, these kids were acting like teenagers. They were very high energy, as kids tend to be. And they're not acting like 45-year-old stuffy Republican guys. These were kids being kids, not doing anything wrong. But for whatever reason, he has to throw our people under the bus. These are Christian people, which Crowder claims to be a Christian or a Catholic. These are people trying to do something noble. Kids being kids, having a good time, laughing, smiling, enjoying life. But he has to call them douchey. Do you think that's right, Crowder? Are you really helping out our cause? Crowder, this is a guy that's a typical neocon, a typical old school Republican, a guy that supported Ted Cruz, didn't like Donald Trump, and he's more the George W. Bush type of mentality, the old school neocon. And this is why guys like James Allsup that represent the new breed, these younger guys, which by no means do I agree with everything that James has to say or all his beliefs or opinions, but the point is, James actually has, unlike Crowder, actually has integrity and actually will do the right thing. If you watch James Allsup's videos about this controversy, he does a great job of breaking things down and actually explaining. He doesn't feel the need to insult these young boys. But let's continue.
We're all supposed to act like this guy isn't a toothless far-left activist instigator seemingly on an opium vision quest? I don't understand.
Now, we're constantly being called racist, and that's going to happen no matter what. I get called racist so much, I don't even care. Even Morrissey, far left-wing Morrissey, even he came out speaking out against calling people racist because it's a non-argument that they use to shut you down. And anytime they're white and disagree with you and can't form an argument against you, they're just gonna throw in the ad hominem attack of "you're racist." They're just trying to shut down the argument with some sort of insult. And most of us by now, as we saw with Donald Trump, when he was called racist, it didn't seem to bother. Most of us were kind of over that. But now what Crowder's actually doing with this stupid joke about this guy being an opium addict, which We have no evidence that this Indian guy does drugs. It's really just a low blow attack. He's further hurting the cause by actually giving our opponents actual ammunition to use against us. It's not a funny joke, and we have no reason to believe that that's true at all. By the way, if you watch Crowder's appearance on Joe Rogan, he talked about that he does do some prescription drugs. I think Adderall, which is basically a prescribed form of speed, something like that. I'm no drug expert. I don't use drugs. But as you can see here, he's very hyped up. And maybe that's because he's trying to up the energy to be entertaining for YouTube, as most YouTubers are. Or, you know, maybe he's on something. Hey, it's okay to speculate. He just throws it in there about this Indian guy. And as I pointed out in my previous video, where I broke down the actual history and exposed some things about the guy's past, that he has a history of being a victim like this, and saying things that probably aren't true. There's a lot of good, valid reasons to criticize the Indian guy, but that's not one of them. Just insinuating that he's a drug addict when we have no evidence whatsoever of that. And by the way, you can insult the black people that were there. You can insult the Indian guy. Originally, the media blamed kids, and everyone found out that was a fake news story. Now the media wants to blame the black guys that were taunting them there. In reality, it was neither Indians nor black people that were slandering our boys. Keep that in mind. These innocent kids, it wasn't the black people or the Indians that were running this hateful campaign across the media against them. But let's get back to the video.
The thing is, you have to light it from the bottom and use a torch lighter. None of that Bic, said my aunt. Really?
Again, these jokes, there's no truth to them, which is probably why they're not funny, but they're not funny at all. If you're going to tell a joke, hopefully it's a funny joke. For jokes really to be funny, there should be truth to it.
Take care of your own. You take care of your own. Nathan Phillips. That's a typical Native American.
Yeah, exactly.
Name. It's like Mr. Miyagi, who is also traditionally named Patrick.
Hi, Chief.
What does an Asian guy being named Patrick have to do with anything? Again, this is just, they're not funny jokes. There's nothing that makes us look good, our size.
Jones.
Yes. You take care of, is that why we see rampant unemployment and drug addiction in Native American communities? Is that why Native American high schoolers have
Now, these are legitimate criticisms. The Indian guy was interviewed and talked about how we take care of our own, we take care of our elders, we take care of our children. Now, what Crowder's doing here is good because he's actually stating factual things there's actual statistics about that we know to be true.
Possibly 3 times more opioid abuse than the rest of the population. They're not faring so well. No. We used to take care of our elders. Have you been to a Native American reservation recently? Does it seem like they're thriving? Like it's the neighborhood that you want to visit to go look at Christmas lights? Not exactly, I would say. Yes, Gerald?
So, exactly. These are fine points to make because he can actually back up with evidence, as he did by showing headlines at least. And we also know these things to be true.
It's the train wreck of socialism in progress right now. We get to look at it and go, what would socialism be like if we provided for everybody anything that they wanted? What would that look like? Look at the Native American reservations. Horrible.
We take care of our elders. Oh, so you don't need the money anymore. No. We want the dough. Don't get us wrong. We still want you to make it rain and huff Windex.
Again, just going back to these stereotypes when we have so many valid ways to attack these people. Like I said in my previous interview, I was very analytical and I broke down things that was fishy about that guy's 2015 report about being a victim of racism. But of course, that's hard and you have to take logic instead of just trying to be high energy with these really cringy jokes.
Here's the story has reopened I can tell you guys don't want to go along with me on this. You guys are cowards. It's reopened some old wounds.
They're cowards. No, they're just stupid jokes, and they're not helping our cause.
Finding out, by the way, that you wrongfully smeared a real person's actual reputation, which is what we run into all the time.
Yeah, this is especially true whenever there's a brand new...
Smearing someone's reputation and calling these innocent young teenage boys, some of which are only 14 years old, calling them douches to potentially 1 million people because you have a very wide audience, that's okay.
It seems like they're purposefully ruining people's reputations. You know, like in journalism, you're supposed to wait until you have some confirmation before you break a story, even if it's a huge breaking story that you want to get out there. And people are basically doing it for a few more likes or a few more shares or a few more things on Facebook.
I think there's more to it than that, which we'll kind of get to in a second after the lessons. But I think you're right. Lesson number 2, I think it's really important, by the way. Unlike the left, who defend their own at all costs, conservatives, a little too quick to cannibalize. Don't jump at that. And I get it. We often criticize the left for refusing to call out their own. And I think rightfully.
It's kind of ironic because here he's criticizing our own, these boys. But also, Crowder, as I said, he's a typical neocon Republican. Whatever the traditional Republican line is, that's his position on everything. And for our people, taking the establishment position on everything is not necessarily to our benefit.
So, of course. Especially when they pal around with pro-Hitler anti-Semites like Farrakhan.
See, there you have the Ben Shapiro type argument where you have to go to just another name-calling thing. Anti-Semite, well, that's as bad as when one of them calls us a racist. It's just a stupid thing that we shouldn't even be bringing up because it's a non-argument.
Far in the other direction, conservatives are not only willing to call out their own, it seems they're overly eager to cannibalize their own just to prove a point. Don't do that. Don't sacrifice someone else's reputation just because of your desire to appear like a reasonable conservative trademark, as I see it on Twitter. Because
it's funny because Crowder himself is guilty of some of this from time to time.
Here's something else. Someone can be a dick, and they can also be right. For reference, see our president.
And the left's attacks are working because they're making us feel so bad about holding the viewpoints that we have that when somebody in our camp does something seemingly inappropriate, we're like, oh gosh, we have to. Like, their attacks are working. They've done it so many times. It makes us come out against our own people when they didn't even do anything wrong.
Now, I don't know who this guy is. I've seen him in some of Crowder's other videos. I guess he's part of his staff. He works on the show. But props to this guy for actually saying these boys didn't do anything wrong, which Crowder, with calling them more than once in the video, he has to open the video by saying they're douchey. That is really insinuating that they did do something wrong, not something illegal or necessarily all that immoral, but he's still placing blame on these boys. But this guy actually has the guts to come out against his boss and just state, matter of fact, they didn't do anything wrong. This guy's clearly a much more reasonable voice. But he doesn't seem all hopped up on drugs either.
We're at war.
Yeah.
This is a lesson, by the way, that Andrew Breitbart tried to teach us. The media tries to paint this, and I was watching, unfortunately, CNN on Sunday. I do it almost every Sunday because
why?
I do it so that you don't have to. You should be thanking me. But they try to say, Trump tries to paint this as though it's
something. I would say here, we know that Crowder's had a lot of health problems. I have to wonder if it's because for his job to do this, he has to ingest constant negativity, and he has to fight that with negativity of his own. But he starts his day listening to NPR, CNN, and all you're getting is a bunch of lies, a bunch of bias, a lot of negativity. And when you just keep putting in negative information, even when you know it's not true, and things that constantly make you angry, I would have to think that that also affects your physical health.
And we're grateful that we're able to be surpassing the big leftist channels here on YouTube.
As you can see, Crowder says that he's very happy to be passing the leftist channels, and that's okay. But keep in mind, he wants to be a very mainstream guy. That's why he's never going to have certain people as guests. He's always going to go for the guests like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson. He's never going to have someone like James Alsop or Roosh V, someone like that. He's never going to have someone a little bit more edgy and controversial. He's either going to want someone that he can debate that's a total extreme leftist moron, or he's going to want some very middle of the road, some kind of goofy guy like Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro on that he can kind of chuckle with and agree with, and they can pat each other on the back.
Right. I think it's definitely been worse for Donald Trump. They're not even pretending to.
Well, because he's not going silently into the night, because Donald Trump is calling them out for it. And I don't think, and I know you were not a big fan of President Trump, and I certainly wasn't in the primaries, but I will say this, at this moment in time, I don't think that any other candidate, had they become president, would have highlighted the media for their dishonesty like he does. Absolutely. I think he's a lightning rod in that respect.
And they blame Donald.
Well, there you go. At least Crowder's being honest about that. Like I said, this is coming from a Ted Cruz supporter. And Ted Cruz, he's not one of our guys. And I'm not saying that because he's not white or doesn't share our DNA. It's just if you look at his values, if you look what someone like that's all about, and I'm not totally against Ted Cruz. There's certainly a lot of politicians that are much worse. But ultimately, someone like Ted Cruz, he's not going to represent our interests. He's not going to, especially the average American, especially the old school type of American. Like when you think of middle America, what those people are like. Ted Cruz, he's very much more into rubbing elbows with the elites and pleasing his special interests than he is the average guy on the street. And that's probably most of you guys watching this.
Their part of it created Donald Trump. If they're pissed at anybody for Donald Trump being president, they need only look at themselves.
Right. Yeah. You do this enough with the MAGA kid and the Native American story, and you say, look at this, and then what you end up with, you say, what do you think about Alexandria Cortez? And Donald Trump says, who cares? That's what happens. Yeah. You end up with, who cares? Screw you. Yeah, but you said the MAGA kid attacked the old Redskins, so I don't care what you have to say.
Now, Crowder's trying to be funny here. This really isn't that good of a Trump impersonation because Trump is actually usually smarter and wittier in his comebacks. So he's really kind of doing a disservice, but that's a minor criticism.
That's what happens. And by the way, yes, we should be reasonable. Okay? We shouldn't have a herd mentality of disagreeing with our opponents just for the sake of disagreement, but compromising just for compromise.
It's ironic because that's exactly what Crowder does. He's always going to walk that establishment party line.
Compromising is just as shameful. You don't become, this is what bothers me when you see conservatives cannibalizing themselves. You don't all of a sudden become reasonable by randomly agreeing with the left every once in a while. By like, well, I'll throw them a bone because the kid had a douchey hat.
How many times is he going to call these kids douchey? We get it. That's like the third time now that you've referred to these kids as douchey. Totally uncalled for.
Appear reasonable. They wanted to appear even-handed as opposed to looking for truth, so they sided against these high school kids who did nothing but really stand and smile. Honestly, I get it. I get it.
Now he said he's admitting they really did nothing but stand and smile and do some cheers, of course. But he's referred to them 3 times in this video already as douchey.
Don't crucify one of your own in a panic over the media, especially not publicly. That's what's really important. Wait for the evidence. And remember, when it comes to truth, when it comes to the access to information right now, don't forget, we are absolutely in a war. We are at war. Remember that. We have AJ Styles coming up after the break. Ooh. Hey there, YouTube.
Well, there you go. We are at war. I think that's, in a way, unfortunately becoming more and more clear every day in some regards. But you got to keep in mind, too, with guys like Crowder, he's not far right-wing at all. And he's also not one of those people that are a little bit more rational, where they look at it as there's this left-right paradigm that people are trying to push. And really, that's not very beneficial for us as a people. It tends to be very divisive. And Crowder tends to be very divisive. But as I said, I've talked about this guy before. I'm going to be talking some more about this guy in the future. I still recommend that people watch him. I think he does a lot of great things. You just have to keep in mind, this guy's a comedian and an entertainer and nothing more. If you can accept him for what he is, and he's even said this many times before, and that's what he considers himself, a comedian, you will really enjoy his content. And I'm not being hard on him for the sake of being hard on him. I don't like criticizing guys that ultimately I like. I do like them for the most part. But someone needs to call out these guys when they do things like this. This could have easily been a perfect video if he would have edited some of that out. When you speak off the cuff, things don't come out perfectly. I understand. I do that a lot myself. So, but when you're editing a video, I mean, come on, man. You didn't really do our side a favor. You didn't really have the integrity when it came to talking about these boys. If you were talking to their parents, and their parents have been coming out, chaperones from the schools have been coming out, all very well-spoken people, taking the side of the right. These kids, they've already been abandoned a lot by our religious leaders, by conservatives. Like, of course, the people we expect to fight against them. We've had Hollywood celebrities calling for violence against these kids. We have all these bigwigs across the internet and across TV speaking out against these kids, and even Crowder has to join in and kind of pile on some with some of the hate.